Hi, I'm Paul Collery, Editor-in-Chief of the Nonprofit Times, and welcome to Executive Session, a series of conversations with changemakers in the nonprofit sector. Our guest today is global expert on philanthropy and social innovation, and probably the best economic advisor in the nonprofit sector, Dr. Una Osili, who has spent more than 2 decades in nonprofit leadership and in the sector, looking at the numbers, economic policy, and research on public and private sectors. She holds the Efroymson Chair in Philanthropy at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University, and serves as the Associate Dean for Research and International Programs and the Dean's Fellow for the Mays Family Institute on Diverse Philanthropy at Indiana University's Lilly School of Philanthropy. Hi, Una. How are things in Indianapolis?
Well, of course, there's a lot of volatility in our world today, but here in Indianapolis, I'm happy to report that it's sunny and spring is on its way. And as you know, we are going right into the Giving USA season. So lots of excitement right here at the Lilly Family School.
As you say, there's a lot going on. And right now, it looks like it'll be a really different 2026 report when that one finally comes out. But what are you seeing now in the data that for this year? I know you've got the compilation for last year, but what are you seeing right now in terms of comparing what's going on right now to any previous period of time for giving?
It's a very unusual time. It's hard to really find a set of historical precedents. I think the closest we've been able to get is to look at the Great Recession in terms of the turmoil in financial markets and also in other markets. But what makes this environment so unique is that there's a lot of uncertainty. Uncertainty, as we noted, in the financial sector, uncertainty in the broader economy, uncertainty on the global front, in the geopolitical context. And that actually has a lot of implications for giving. We tend to think about people give when they feel financially and economically secure. So that is certainly a concern. And we also find that when there's a lot of uncertainty and volatility, households, Americans, tend to postpone their giving decisions, especially very large commitments around giving. So that's something we're watching very closely. Now, on the perhaps more optimistic front, what we've also seen in past periods is that foundations, of course, give out of a 2-3 year rolling average, sometimes more, 4 years. And so they are in a better position in terms of how the current environment affects their giving. And fortunately, many foundations have been able to build up financial reserves, and also stock market performance in the last few years gives them a lot of strength heading into this volatile period. And then with global corporations and companies more broadly, I think understanding how giving is going to change on the corporate side will depend a lot on what happens within industry segments. So overall, a very complex time, lots of nuance in the data. But I think the broad takeaway for us is uncertainty is the word that we're really paying close attention to.
What we're seeing from several of the fundraising platforms is that there has been donor response to an ask, but the average gift is down significantly. And as we worry about the medium to smaller donors, it would appear to me, maybe, and I don't know if it would to you, that this part of the year, the first and second quarter of the year, is going to be a challenge for nonprofits.
Yes, I think there's a lot of concern in the field right now. I mentioned uncertainty, but at the beginning of the year, we had a fair number of events, natural disasters, and we did see a very strong response to, for example, the wildfires in California. There was a lot of giving in response to that as we tracked the household response, individual giving as in particular. What we also saw at that moment was that peer-to-peer giving was certainly quite strong. But as we move into the, say, second half of the year, we have to be really concerned about the effect of any economic policies, inflationary pressures, and just the overall uncertainty of financial and labor markets. We are seeing a lot of questions around employment figures. So I think just the broad macroeconomic environment is going to be very important. At the same time, from the nonprofit organizational landscape, I think it's really important for organizations to learn, learn some of those lessons from the Great Recession, in the sense that building relationships is important, whether or not there are these volatile pressures in the economy. And this is an even more important time to reach out to donors, because, as you noted, needs in communities have grown more visible, whether that's in housing or food or any of these areas where budget cuts are being felt.
Well, particularly in the Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia area, where many of these layoffs are impacting, so many of the families were already on the edge, because it was probably about 125, 150,000 to be able to meet all your bills in that region. And if you're a government employee already on that edge, it would seem to me that there's going to be more of a challenge for nonprofits financially, and try to deal with all these new clients.
Absolutely. That's what we're seeing at the local level, is that with unemployment, with some of these economic pressures, it's not just on the donor side, it's also on you could think about it as the service provision side. And where we're also seeing a lot of concern for nonprofits is as they face these government budget cuts or staffing challenges. How do they meet the demands of the moment? And I think there's also an opportunity for philanthropy here, because when we start thinking about how Americans have responded in other crises, I sort of look back at the Great Recession in particular, we saw many households did actually increase their giving, especially in the basic needs area. So there was some shuffling, maybe substitution of giving, and some of the high net worth households focused their giving on basic needs. So I think there is, in every crisis, there's also an opportunity in terms of thinking about how you make your case to your donors, how you tell your story, but also an opportunity to be perhaps innovative in service delivery. We've been discussing a lot of the changes that nonprofits were able to implement during the COVID crisis, especially around innovation, using technology, collaboration. So we're seeing some of that in the field right now, where a lot of creativity in thinking about how do we deliver services perhaps at a more efficient cost structure, but also understanding that these are real impacts on communities. And I think we have to all be conscious of that as well.
Everybody focuses on fundraising and somebody writing a check or clicking a box and sending money. But the largest block of revenue for a nonprofit is program service fees. So if people are unable to buy something, go to a theater, go to a thrift store, have you done any looking at previous years or previous recessions or possible difficult times, not necessarily a recession, where program services fees have declined, and that's hurt the organization rather than the fundraising side of it?
Yes, I think during the Great Recession, and especially during this COVID crisis, what we saw as sort of a success story out of the times of economic hardship is that many organizations were able to pivot, is the word we used often, but reinvent their sort of cost structure and think about revenue generation and earned income, as you've noted, in different ways. So one very prominent example was in the arts sector, where a lot of earned income came from in-person events, and they recognized, well, people aren't coming to in-person events because of mandates around social distancing. And then they moved to a different structure where it was online events, and those sometimes involved an earned income strategy as well, and sponsorships. So I think there's certainly in this moment, there are opportunities for many organizations to think about the service delivery model, the cost structure, and how they can gain efficiencies. I do think it's also an opportunity for many donors, so thinking about the donor side, to prioritize what they feel is important, and also make sure that they are supporting the organizations. And the support might be through donations, but as you've noted, it's also about maybe services that they derive from those organizations.
Let's say you're the CEO or the financial manager at a nonprofit. Other than the obvious, the lack of revenue coming in the door, what are some red flags you would be looking at from an organizational economic standpoint?
Yes, I think for many organizations, it's looking at the cash reserves, the cash balances, and also in thinking through contingencies. For many organizations, they have to sort of run some scenario models. And we've seen that taking place right now where they're looking at earned income, they're looking at perhaps sources of government funding that may be federal, state, or local, but also thinking about all of the different revenue streams. I think one phrase that also resonates very well in this moment is diversification. That's diversification around your income sources. When you think about how those are being invested, looking at a diversified model, and even from a programmatic structure, how are you diversifying the work that you do so that you're not putting all your eggs in one basket, as it were. So I think a lot of the very simple phrases or concepts that we use in the nonprofit sector it's also a very timely moment to think about how do we weather a storm and also keep the long view in mind. Nonprofits are unique because of their focus on mission and the values that they bring to the work. And in this moment, I think even though there is this short term, how do we weather the storm or navigate a crisis, there's also a bigger picture, which is the mission, the values, and the work they're doing in the community, and making sure that they have both the financial resources, but also in some cases, it's about stakeholder support, engagement, volunteerism to actually achieve that mission in this very difficult and challenging time period.
Should nonprofit executives be talking to their donors about the overall economy in their particular areas? Obviously, everybody think globally but act locally. But if a particular area is doing well, the underlying economy seems to be solid. It's the stock market and the bond market that's been really having the yips. Should nonprofit executives be talking to their communities regarding economics and how it's interacting with the organizations in their communities?
Yes, I think that is a very resounding yes. Too often, I think there is a bit of a vacuum, and nonprofits are not necessarily engaging their donors, but also their larger stakeholders in terms of how this current environment affects their work and affects their ability to deliver on mission. I think when stakeholders are engaged, they're more likely to help that organization think through, of course, how you navigate this crisis, but also how you build a vision for the future. Because in some sectors, we're actually seeing very significant shifts that can't really be just managed or sort of short-term thinking. One example I would give is the international sector, where US aid shutting down means that for many organizations, they have to come up with a whole new business model or new way of delivering services. I think organizations should be open to having that conversation, very candid conversation with their donors, with their stakeholders, to help them understand, because often many donors, many stakeholders are not necessarily in the same seats as those nonprofit executives and don't see all of the challenges or pressures that they're facing. So this is the time to be as candid as possible.
One last question for you, Una, but some shameless self-promotion first. But firstly, I use Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. You've got a lot of resources up on your website, isn't that right?
Absolutely. We have the Giving USA report, which we do in partnership with Giving USA Foundation. That's one report. We also have a wealth of resources on how Americans give. The Generosity for Life website covers a lot of that information. And then for people who are interested in just learning more about high net worth giving or particular segments of giving, we also have resources. So I encourage you to visit the school's website, download all the reports. One of the reports that actually presents a lot of hope in this very difficult time is a recent project we worked on called What Americans Think About Philanthropy. And it showed that despite all the mistrust we see in institutions right now, philanthropy...
Let's stop one there. I got to stop this. I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem.
Guys, how can we, where should she start back again on those sentences?
Ideally from the beginning, if that's okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry.
Happy to. We have a wealth of resources on our website. Generosity for Life is one of our front-facing websites that houses a lot of data on patterns in giving, how Americans are giving right now. So I encourage you to visit that website. Another project that you can download from the school's website is a report that actually has a hopeful notes in this moment. The project is called What Americans Think About Philanthropy. And in that report, we found that Americans trust philanthropy and nonprofits more than any other institution. So I think that is something that we can all take a lot of hope and inspiration from, because in this time when people are looking for places of stability, institutions that can bring communities together, nonprofits and philanthropy have an opportunity to lead during these turbulent times.
And another place for resources is the Nonprofit Times website, www.thenonprofittimes.com. News, information, analysis, the sector's largest salary and benefits report. So take a look at the Nonprofit Times website at www.thenonprofittimes.com. Final question for you, Una. You've been doing economic theory and doing economic work in the nonprofit space for a long time. If there was one silo of data that you've been unable to get and want to get, what would that be?
Well, one area that we're very interested in is the sort of real-time response data. Of course, there are a lot of platforms that collect that sort of information, but it's sometimes difficult to access, especially in real time. It would be wonderful to partner with organizations that have that real-time data. We have a lot of other data sources, but that's often a gap in our work. And I think alongside that, because today there's such a broader array of ways that people give, it would also be really useful to understand all of the different ways that people are giving, whether that's conscious consumerism, the kinds of products they buy. Also very interesting, of course, crowdfunding. We have some data on that, but not the whole picture. So I think understanding the full picture of giving right now, the different ways people are giving, and then the time response that allows researchers to really see how events in our world markets, in our local economies are shaping giving would be very interesting as well.
Yeah, this is the problem. Every time you say something, I've got 5 more questions I want to ask. I do have one more then because of something you have said. Given the layoffs in the federal government and the changing in the way that the government is working, is it going to be more difficult for you to get data and for the sector to get data?
That's something we are very concerned about. Right now, we are in, I think, a steady state because the data that we need is already available. But as so many things are changing, including the very agencies that we rely on for data, I think we all have to be concerned, whether it's the IRS, the Commerce Bureau that generates the Consumer Price Index and a lot of the other information we use to calculate GDP. We have been very fortunate in the United States. I think our country collects some of the best data on the nonprofit sector. It's not perfect, but by far we have a wealth of resources to draw on. So other countries have looked to us as a model for nonprofit data. And so as we start to think about how this landscape might affect our not just, of course, the work that we do, but even the data sets that are available to researchers, to analysts, to decision makers, we are starting to think about, well, how would we get some of those data sets if certain units of the government are not working or not necessarily operational? This is certainly a concern, but I think I tend to be more optimistic than pessimistic. So I'm hopeful that even as these conversations and decisions are made, that the importance of data and the reliance so many of us have come to make decisions are really data driven, that permeates a lot of the decision making, so that even with cuts, many of those agencies that we rely on so much are not just kept intact, but that there are additional investments, because I think collecting the information has gotten more difficult over time.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Una Osili of the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy and holder of the Efroymson Chair in Philanthropy at the university. Always a pleasure to talk to you. It's always fun to hear your voice and hear these numbers from you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to join. Thank you.